Good day, everybody. Welcome to the fourth knowledge lecture of the Neophyte grade. We have covered alchemy at its very basics, and we have covered astrology at its very basics. In the fourth knowledge lecture, we will begin a series of 2 knowledge lectures on the Qabalah. The Qabalah is something that I am quite familiar with, having spent nearly 30 years involved with it, and even after 30 years, there is still a lot to understand and unpack. For proficiency purposes in the Qabalah, you will be required to know what the Qabalah is and how to navigate the Sephiroth. The fourth knowledge lecture deals with what the Qabalah is, and in a future knowledge lecture, number 5, we'll deal with the Sephiroth. So without further ado, let us get into the Neophyte knowledge lecture 4 for the Qabalah. All right. Again, these knowledge lectures come from the Golden Dawn tradition. When you go through them, they're not exactly as the knowledge lectures would have been given to their students, because as you're going to see, they're mentioning names that didn't exist until well after the Golden Dawn came down. So these have been refined over the years, but they still contain quite a bit of information. I have also covered Qabalah several times on this channel, so a lot of this will be rehashing if you've already seen those videos. However, it's always good to see multiple perspectives on the same subject. Before we begin, I'm going to discuss a couple things that I feel are important. This slide shows that we have multiple versions of the Tree of Life, and this is the Tree of Life that you're looking at here. The original configuration of a Tree of Life, as it were, is described in the Sefer Yetzirah, but it is described as a boundless cube of infinite length, breadth, and width. Since then, a tree was crafted, or a way of assembling the symbols in a more humane way that we would understand. This center tree in color represents, and let me go ahead and get my laser pointer here. This represents the Hermetic Tree of Life, or the standard Tree of Life, if you will, the one that most people are going to be familiar with. And in this Tree of Life, this originated from a guy named Kircher in the early 1500s in a book called the Egyptus, where he was trying to synthesize all of mystic knowledge as it was known in the 1500s in a series of tomes. And Kircher's work involved creating or finding this and publishing it. And this was the Tree of Life version that Mathers chose to use for the Golden Dawn. And as such, it is considered the standard Tree of Life, or you'll hear it called the Hermetic Tree of Life. But it is not the only one by far. To its left here, we have another version of the Tree of Life called the Ari array. And the Ari tree is named after a rabbi named Ari, and has some minor differences. The Sephiroth are in their same locations. However, you can notice the paths are different. The paths connecting the trees. The Ari array is missing the 2 connections from Malkuth to Hod and Nesak, and it has replaced those up here at the top in the Abyss, whereas the Hermetic tree has the paths, and the paths across the Abyss are missing. Another important thing to note are the Hebrew letters affixed to the paths are different between these 2 arrays. The Ari array breaks the Hebrew letters down into their types, whereas the Hermetic array breaks them down by number. For example, Aleph sits here, number 1. This is number 1 Aleph. Bet is the second Hebrew letter. This is number 2. So it goes 1, 2, right? And you can see it's going to filter itself down mathematically down the tree, whereas the Ari array does not do that. It's the mother letters, Aleph, which is here in the Hermetic array. It is here in the Ari array. Aleph, Mem, and Shin represent the 3 elements, fire, air, and water. And if you're Freemason, that may interest you, because that is something that also flows with the order of the degrees from bottom to top. Also interesting, so those are the 3 mother letters. The vertical letters represent the double letters. So you see there's 7 of those. So The 7 double letters are located vertically, and the elemental letters are located diagonally. So that is how this tree is set up. And then over to the right, we have a comparison of the Ari array with something called the Gra array, which is another way of forming the tree of life. This is not commonly seen, but it exists. And what's important to note is that there is no one correct tree of life. And if anyone tells you that there is, well, they're trying to sell you something. One of the mysteries of Qabalah is that we all have our own trees, just like a forest can be composed of the oak trees, and all the oak trees will look different, but they're all oak trees. Same concept here. We all have our own tree of life to discover. Something else to point out, a couple other things. This configuration on the left here, this is a stack of these are the stack of the trees of life in the 4 worlds. Atzulith, Beria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the 4 worlds of the Qabalah, the tree of life. There's actually a 5th, which is Adam Kadmon, which is usually called the invisible world. But this configuration here is called also Jacob's ladder, which may be something you've heard of before. Jacob's ladder is climbing from the base world of formation, the world we live in, and climbing all the way back up to the divine, which is the point of theurgy and the point of Western esotericism. To the right, we have 2 representations of basically the same thing. This is to remind you that as above, so below. The tree of life is reflected by the tree of death underneath. And we must reconcile both to be able to climb the tree of life. You must reconcile the tree of death before you finish your ascent. This is also illustrating what is known as the path of the serpent. You can see a serpent climbing the tree. The path of the serpent is moving from the base back to the divine. Another glyph you'll commonly see is the path of the flaming sword. That is a path of creation that shows how life was created as it descended. So we are ascending. In Rosicrucian traditions, your degree, so for example, the Neophyte degree or grade that you are working on proficiency for is the 0 equals 0 grade, which means it sits outside of the tree of life. And this is just a primer for you. Once you finish your proficiency and you are initiated as a first degree Rosicrucian, at least in this order, you ascend to Malkuth, and you'll see it called 1 equals 10. 1 means that you've taken your first step, and 10 means that's the Sephiroth you currently reside in. And the Rosicrucian degrees, you are climbing up the Hermetic Tree of Life. So you can see the Tree of Life is definitely it's a pillar, if not the central pillar of Western esotericism, and our lecture will make mention of that. So without further ado, let's see what the Golden Dawn has to say about the Qabalah, Knowledge Lecture 4. Qabalah is a Hebrew word, which means tradition. It is derived from the root word kaibel, meaning to receive. So you will hear it referred to as both, a tradition and to receive. This refers to the ancient custom of handing down esoteric knowledge by oral transmission. What the word Qabalah encompasses is an entire body of ancient Hebrew mystical principles that are the cornerstone and focus of the Western esoteric tradition. Virtually all Western spiritual systems can trace their roots to the Kabbalistic tree of life. The exact origins of the Qabalah are unclear, but it certainly contains vestiges of Egyptian, Greek, and Chaldean influence, and I will interject at this point. No one knows the exact age of the Qabalah. Some people will affirm that they do know. They are wrong. No one knows. We know that the Qabalah was first written down in either the 2nd century or roughly the 14th, 13th, or 14th centuries. That being the Sefer Yetzirah. They argue over when it was actually written. We know that the Zohar was written in the Middle Ages. However, that was not the invention of the Qabalah, as some people mistake. Some people mistake that it was written then, therefore it was created then. The Qabalah was an oral tradition. None of the mystery school's teachings were ever written down until it became a necessity to do so because certain forces were attempting to exterminate them. So they had to write it down to preserve the knowledge. We do know that there are traces of Kabbalistic teachings found within the ancient Greek philosophies, heading back several centuries into the BC era. But its exact origins, no one knows. Legend states that there are three legends that I know of. The first is that the archangel Raziel transmitted the Qabalah to Adam when Adam was evicted from the Garden of Eden. The second most common, actually I would say the most common legend is that Moses received the Qabalah from God on Mount Sinai when he received the Ten Commandments. It was one of the things he received. And another lesser-known legend is that Abraham was the one who received the Qabalah from God. Whether any of that's true or not, no one will ever know. It's whatever resonates in you, essentially. But this is truly an ancient pillar of mysticism. So that being said, we will move on. By its nature, mysticism is knowledge that cannot be communicated directly, but may be expressed only through symbolism and metaphor. If you're a member of the Freemasonic fraternities or the Rosicrucian fraternities, that will ring true for you as well, because that is how a lot of things are communicated. Like other esoteric systems, Qabalah also draws upon the mystic's awareness of the transcendence of the eternal deity. Another element of Qabalah is that it seeks to reveal the hidden mysteries of the divine, as well as the connection between the divine life on one hand and the life of humans on the other. The goal of the Kabbalist is to discover and to invent keys to the understanding of arcane symbols, which reflect the eternal mysteries. And I will double underline that part for you again. The goal of the Kabbalist, that is one who studies the Qabalah, the goal of the Kabbalist is to discover and to invent keys to the understanding of arcane symbols, which reflect the eternal mysteries. This goes back to the Tree of Life and why there are multiple versions. There are no one correct version. We all have our own Tree of Life. We all have keys to discover, and some of us may invent new ones. That is what esotericism is all about. Israel Regardie stated that Qabalah is a trustworthy guide, leading to a comprehension of the universe and one's own self. It is all this and more. This tradition was never restricted to instruction in the mystical path alone. It also includes ideas on the origins of the universe, of angelic hierarchies, and the practice of magic. Qabalah is the foundation upon which the art of Western magic rests. Magic has been defined by Aleister Crowley as the science and the art of causing changes to occur in conformity with will. To this, Dion Fortune added, changes in consciousness. The Qabalah, which Dion Fortune called the Yoga of the West, reveals the nature of certain physical and psychological phenomena. Once these are rightly understood, double underline, once these are rightly understood, the student can use the principles of magic to exercise control over the conditions and circumstances of his or her life. Magic provides the practical application of the theories supplied by the Qabalah. The Qabalah as it exists today is a vibrant, living, and dynamic philosophy which includes ideas on the origin of the entire cosmos, the eternal mind of God, and the spiritual development of humankind. It is a precise mystical system that describes universal laws and shows us how to utilize spiritual principles in everyday life. By firmly fixing Kabbalistic symbols such as the Tree of Life in one's mind, the aspirant has access to a balanced group of archetypes that the inner self can more easily relate to, thus making true spiritual growth more readily attainable. And again, these are the same principles made use by Freemasons and Rosicrucians in their orders. It's the same type of system. It is unlocking things that are already inside of you by use of symbols and allegories. As the Hermetic student begins to contemplate and experience the energies of the Sephiroth, which are the 10 emanations of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, he or she will find that they develop into genuine forces that become animated within the psyche. These newly awakened forces will initiate a process of reorganization in the mind, of the student, gathering up disjointed elements of the divine powers which already lay dormant in every average person. They begin to structure themselves in accordance with the Sephiroth, permitting the student to tap into a previously unknown source of divine inspiration, which is kept alive and prolific through meditation and active ritual work. Again, these are kept alive and prolific through meditation, very important. That's why we go over meditation as such an important thing, and actual active ritual work. This is why just reading this doesn't do anything. It is by partaking in the ritual work that these forces are stymied and activated. The Qabalah has been often called the ladder of lights because it not only depicts cosmic generation, which is the descent of the divine into the physical, aka the flaming sword glyph, but also defines how the individual may employ it for spiritual ascent by purifying both body and mind through ceremony, contemplation, and prayer, until at length one achieves that pristine state of consciousness that is necessary to attain union with the higher self, which is the emissary to the divine self represented by the first sephira of Keter. That is the path of the serpent that I just showed you, climbing up. Some people who have a brief encounter with the Qabalah come away with the idea that it is purely patriarchal or male-oriented philosophy simply because of its Hebrew origins. Nothing could be further from the truth. Take, for example, a word which is common throughout Kabbalistic teachings, Elohim. This is a word formed with a feminine noun, Eloah, and a masculine plural, Im. You are left with a word that has both a male and female characteristic, which literally means gods. The creative principle formed from the perfect and equal union of the divine male and the divine female principles. Read in this context, the Kabbalistic origins of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, give an entirely new meaning. The first sentence of Genesis, which in Hebrew begins as Berashith bara Elohim athaha samhim wihath aretz, can be interpreted as, in the beginning, the gods, the united male and female aspect of the divine, created the heavens and the earth. This idea of the equality of the divine male and the divine female principles, although suppressed for centuries by male-dominated society, is carefully hidden in Kabbalistic doctrine, although at times it has slipped out unforeseen in almost all translations of the Pentateuch, such as in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27. And God went on to say, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness." And God proceeded to create the man in his image. In God's image he created him. Male and female he created them. Another example is the word Sephiroth, which is used to describe the 10 emanations of the divine. Here we have a feminine noun, Sephirah, being joined to the feminine plural, Oth. This again points to the importance of the feminine in Qabalah. The Sephiroth themselves are generally considered feminine because they structure and give form to the emanations of deity. Thus, anyone who seriously studies the Qabalah for any length of time will see that it is a very balanced system for spiritual growth. The Qabalah is usually classified under 4 heads, which overlap each other in some instances. Okay, there's the 4 versions of the Qabalah. Number 1, the dogmatic Qabalah. This is the study of ancient Kabbalistic books and texts, such as the written Torah, also called the Pentateuch, the Zohar, the Bahir, and the Sefer Yetzirah. I will also throw in another book called the Sefer Raziel. Those are Kabbalistic texts, and I encourage you all to pick them up. They are not easy reads, but they are flowing with Kabbalistic energy. Okay, so that's just reading about the Qabalah. The second, practical Qabalah, deals with talismans and ceremonial magic. Practical Qabalah is forbidden by Jewish mysticism usually. You have to be a certain caste of priest to be able to work in practical Qabalah. In Western esotericism, that is eschewed, and anyone can work practical Qabalah. I will forewarn you not to mess with things that you're not ready for. Number 3, the literal Qabalah deals with gematria, the relationships between numbers and the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which yield many hidden meanings of Hebrew words and names. The literal Qabalah also deals with several other versions of ciphers and ways that the language can be manipulated to produce other results. And you will find in Hebrew that the holy texts are ciphered quite heavily, and certain holy texts are ciphered quite heavily. And this carries over into Greek, as well as Coptic, as well as Latin. So any of the texts that you wield in alchemy, astrology, Qabalah, the holy writings themselves, typically will have an esoteric meaning locked behind literal Qabalah. And last, the unwritten Qabalah refers to the correct knowledge of the sacred symbol known as the Tree of Life, Etz HaKayim. This is the only branch of the Qabalah that the neophyte of this course will need to study for now. You're essentially going to be studying the Tree of Life symbol as a neophyte, and that's all you care about at this point. We will not at this time describe the long history and evolution of the Qabalah as espoused and elucidated by various teachers and sources down through the ages. Well, I already kind of did that at the beginning, but they're not going to go into that more. To do so would be to place an undue burden upon the neophyte. I disagree. I think knowing where things were rooted in is important. However, for ambitious students who like to take on burdens, we highly recommend a book by Gershom Scholem called simply Qabalah, published by Dorset Press in New York. This book gives an excellent and detailed account of the various schools of Kabbalistic thought. I have also included in the Order of the Rose Cross packet suggested readings. There are 3 books I suggested. Pick one. They are not light reading. Greer's book is probably the lightest read in terms of accessibility that I can say. Okay, so with that, this concludes the lecture, the 4th lecture of the Neophyte grade on the Qabalah. In the next lecture, we will go over the 10 Sephiroth, and we will describe what each of them represents. And all told, for your proficiency, you will need to know what we discussed in this lecture, minus the long history that I gave you, and the Sephiroth in general, what they are. I hope you found this informative. I certainly enjoy the Qabalah and talking about it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I will see you again shortly for the 5th knowledge lecture on the Sephiroth. Till then, good day.